What's going on, everybody? My name is Ben, and welcome back to The Bench for a brand new episode here on Ben Builds with the Boys. And we are back on our 1/48 scale Academy P-38G Lightening. Today I want to go ahead and push this thing a little closer to being finished. So my goal is to get this finally in primer, and then next episode, try to get some paint and maybe decals. So first off, we have to go ahead and finish off the cockpit. I've been talking about this for a while now. I need to make some seat belts for the interior, and that's not necessarily going to be easy, but I think it's actually a good idea here because you will end up seeing quite a bit of that seat. So we're going to grab our references here. We're going to start in and check out some images and try to get an idea of how these things go together. And then I'm going to go ahead and start off with some Tamiya tape and some basic wire and start making our own seat belts. Not something for the faint of heart for sure. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, but I think it's going to pay off here. So let's go ahead and get started. So starting off here, we're going to grab some wire. Now I don't know the diameter of this wire. It's something I've had sitting in my spares box for a long time. It actually comes from my grandfather, and I think this is actually magnet wire. I'm not entirely certain, but I think it's magnet wire. And we're going to cut a length of wire here, and we're going to get this ready to go ahead and make our belts from this particular length of wire. Now something I actually learned from Boyz Hobbies is we're going to take our end of our wire and we're going to chuck it into the end of our pin vise and lock it down. Then we're going to grab the other end of the wire, we're going to hold it stationary, and we're going to rotate the pin vise and just start kind of twisting the wire. This is going to create a very stiff length of wire, which we can then use and cut pieces for the other areas here on the belts, like the buckles or any sort of support systems. This is going to go ahead and get us a nice stiff portion of wire that we can use for other purposes. Then once that is all ready to go, we'll pull it out of the pin vise and we're going to move over to the seat belts. And I'm going to be using some Tamiya 3mm tape for the actual belts themselves. I'm not going to really measure them out, but I'm going to try to shoot for about 1 millimeter to 1.5 millimeters thick. And we're going to make the lap belts a little thicker than the shoulder belts. And we're just going to cut them with our X-Acto knife into very fine strips. That's going to allow us then to cut smaller sections out of these pieces of tape, and then we can make our belts. So once I have a good idea of the thickness I want, I'll cut them down into smaller sections and we'll move on from there and get these things ready for processing. I'm also going to go ahead and test fit these against the seat itself and see if I've got a nice size. If it looks too small or too big, I'll adjust, make a new one or whatever, but this looks pretty good. We're going to use these and we're going to move on from here and let's start making some actual buckles. Now to make the buckles themselves, I'm going to go ahead and take some wire and I'm going to twist it around a piece of styrene. I'm going to take this thicker piece right here, I'm going to cut it into something roughly around the size of the belts themselves, and then we can then wrap our wire around this and the wire should take the shape of this particular piece of styrene. So let's go ahead and make a nice cut here and we'll just snap that right off. Then we'll start wrapping our wire around this little guide. And I'm just going to make a couple of passes. I'm not going to make a ton of belts here, so just a couple of turns will give us a number of buckles and we can move on from there. And then we'll go ahead and we'll slice down the middle of the flat section here on this guide, and that will separate each of these twists into individual buckles. Once I've got this all nicely trimmed down, I'll slide them off into our little paint dish here, and we will end up with something looks a bit like this. As you can see, it's a little bit on the wide side, but that's okay. We'll be able to fine tune that once we get it onto the belt. We've got a little pile of them here and we'll start making them up and see what we can do. So the next step I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to take our piece of Tamiya tape that we cut earlier, and I'm going to take a very straight thin piece of wire and I'm going to go ahead and drop that right in the middle of the tape. Then I'm going to fold the tape over top of that, creating a bit more like a T shape, and we're going to stick the tape down to itself. And then I can feed that down through the buckle, and then we can go ahead and create an actual full buckle here for our belt. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of work that down very carefully, and once I get it close enough to where I'd like it to be, I can then just reopen the tape and pull it taut so that it will actually go ahead and compress the belt itself with the buckle and that little piece of wire across the middle, which acts as a stop. So then we just slowly start opening it up, pretty much like you're opening a book or anything like that. We're just going to take each end, we're going to pull them apart from each other, and that should go ahead and keep everything under a nice bit of tension. And we're left with something that looks decent. It's not great, but I think it's better than nothing at all. So once we go ahead and get that all nicely squared away, we can come back and we can make little adjustments here and there with our tweezers just to keep everything in line. And then we can secure it with a little bit of CA glue. That's going to be important here because these are going to be a little bit under tension and we'll be moving them around on the seat, so I don't want them coming apart. Just a little drop of our CA glue, and then make sure that it actually gets in there. We're going to take a little bit of our accelerator by Bob Smith Industries and drop one drop right on top of that buckle. That should help keep everything nice and tight, and then we can go ahead and start adjusting it onto the seat itself. So this should be pretty decent, and we have what looks like an okay belt. Then we'll go ahead and come back with our X-Acto knife, and we're just going to slice off the very edges of each of these pieces of wire. I don't want to have a lot of excess wire hanging out, so we'll just trim that down. We'll give it a little bit of a tamp with the back of our X-Acto knife, and then I think we have something that looks pretty passable as a belt. We can also test fit it against the seat and kind of get an idea of just how big that buckle is in comparison to the seat, and I think it looks okay. Not perfect, but it'll work. Now we also have to go ahead and make the ends of the belts, and each of the belts has a bit of like a latch or some sort of a clasp that goes ahead and hooks everything together, and that tends to be in the shape of kind of like a triangle, kind of with a smashed up top. So it's almost in the shape of a Y. And so we're going to go ahead and take some wire, we're going to bend something that looks similar to that, and then we can cut that off the wire and we can just kind of manipulate that once we get it onto the belt itself. Again, I want something to look a little bit close to what it is in real life, but doesn't have to be perfect. So this is going to be something I think is just going to get us close to it. Again, we're just going to go ahead and tuck the Tamiya tape over top of that and stick it to itself, trapping everything between the two layers of tape. Then we can trim it up, we can go ahead and reshape if we need to, and we can drop a little bit of super glue right on top of that with some accelerator, and that's going to be perfectly fine for our purposes here on the model kit. Just a little bit of fine tuning here and there. It's not going to be perfect, you know, it's just not. If I wanted something to look absolutely immaculate, I could go out, I could buy some photo etch belts, which have their inherent difficulties, but I don't want to spend any money necessarily, so I'm just going to make my own. I think they're going to come out okay. Now we'll just go ahead and test fit them against the seat, and yeah, I like it. It looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and jump into our first time lapse. We're going to finish off making our seat belts. We're going to get all that nicely squared away. We're going to do a little bit of painting on those, a little bit of weathering, get them glued to the seat, get the seat glued into the cockpit, and then we can go ahead and mask off the canopy, get that painted for the interior green, and get everything installed. We're going to finish off the cockpit, get everything glued into place, and then we can start it on some cleanup for things like the wheels, maybe some of the intakes. We're just going to get everything ready for priming, and then we'll prime it with Mr. Surfacer 1200 mixed in with some 50/50 Mr. Leveling Thinner. So let's go ahead and get started here, guys. This is actually coming right along. We'll get everything wrapped up. We'll be back and I'll show you guys what we come up with. All right, everybody, so we are back, and so far the P-38 is coming right along. We've got everything primed, but I started thinking a bit about the cockpit. Initially, I actually thought about keeping the cockpit closed because there wasn't a lot of detail in there to see, but I've now since gone ahead and done quite a bit more detail work and added in seatbelts and painting and all that stuff. So I think I'm going to go ahead and keep the cockpit open so you can see down inside. Now that I'm keeping it open, and I plan on having all the details shown there, I actually should drop the boarding ladder so that you can have a bit more of an idea of where the pilot can actually climb into the aircraft and out of the aircraft. So in that case, I'm going to have to go ahead and grab my drill bits, grab my X-Acto knife and jeweler files. I'm going to have to come back and open up these very tiny slits at the top rear portion of the center gondola and on the undersurface of that as well. So that's going to be a little tricky. It's not going to be easy, but I think we should probably get that going because that does add a little bit more realism to my idea here for the P-38. On top of that, I also want to go ahead and start preparing for weathering. I do want to do some chipping around the center portion of the aircraft, so I need to apply some silver paint, overcoat that with some future to protect it. I need to come in there and add in some of the intakes and all the little details. I need to drill out some openings for some mass balances, pitot tubes and all that. So there's a lot more little fine-tuning work we have to do. So let's go ahead and jump in there to our last time lapse. Let's push on through, fix up some seams. We have a lot more to do. All right, let's jump in there. Let's start having some fun. All right, everybody, we are back, and so far so good. We painted up a couple detail parts. We've got our primer all over the aircraft, and we've added in our seats and our seat belts. We've glued in the canopy. We have our center section nicely masked off, so we can go ahead and do a bit more painting. And next episode, we're going to go ahead and come on back, and we're going to start doing some pre-shade. We're going to do some top coats. We're going to do some weathering, some decals, some gloss coats, all that good stuff. But we're going to go ahead and take a pause right now because there's a lot more to do, and this video has already run a little bit longer than I typically would like. Thank you so much for joining us here on episode number 4 of Ben Builds with the Boys. Next episode, for episode 5, we'll be back. We're going to start getting this thing into color, start working with those decals. Hopefully they work well. I know Academy decals can be a bit troublesome from time to time, but I'm hoping these actually work well, and we will go ahead and get this thing looking a bit more like a P-38. Make sure to go check out Joe and Charlie's builds. I know Charlie is finished up, turned out a really nice looking P-38J. Joe is still working on his, but it's coming along. It's looking sweet, and we will see you back here on the next episode for Ben Builds with the Boys. Until then, you guys know the drill. Go out there, get yourself some bench time, have some fun, build something cool, and we'll see you back here next week, guys. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you soon.